You know, every now and then you have a chance to catch up with an old friend from back in the day, and this time we're catching up with one of our best friends from back in the day, a man who was the photographer of the stars, Mr. Robert Knight. How you doing, Robert?
Really good. Great to see you in Tokyo, of all places.
Amazing to see you here.
Unbelievable.
And you're here to promote a young band called Lyric Doobie, right?
Yeah, Lyric Doobie is an amazing young 17-year-old guitar player, singer-songwriter from Toronto, Canada. And he got chosen by CIMA, which is the Canadian Independent Music Association, to be part of a trade mission to Japan to further, Canadian export music. And the Canadian government, I gotta say, is far more generous with the arts than the American government, because I don't know of any such program where they support the arts in the United States like the Canadians do.
They do a great job.
They do a great job. They'll support your tour, they'll support your video, they'll support your everything. And because they see the reality of the export to Canada is a revenue source.
We should be doing something like this with artists from Hawaii.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Growing up in Hawaii, I didn't surf and I didn't go to the beach, and there wasn't much else to do. Mm-hmm. And at first I was very reluctant on Hawaiian music, but then I kind of found the contemporary Hawaiian music scene very appealing because I ran into first Robert and Roland Casamero, Peter Moon, because I was involved in an album cover shoot with David Cornwall for I think it was Sunday Manoa.
You're going back a few years with all of these names.
And I'm actually on the back cover taking a picture of everybody with a whole bunch of freaks and all kinds of different things. And I became friends with all those people. And then I kind of like, wow, this is really interesting. And I was brought in 1970 to the Waimea Music Festival to basically, through John DeMello and his father, to photograph an album they were going to record at Waikoloa, Jack DeMello. And there was this young guitar player that had come over from the United States to study with Gabby Pahanui, named Ry Cooder.
Oh, yes. And the rest is Chicken Skin Music.
Chicken Skin Music.
And that's the name of the album, right?
That's right. But the ironic thing is that Hawaiian music really influenced a lot of reggae. It influenced a lot of blues, because Ry Cooder went back to do soundtracks for Paris, Texas, and yet at the same time, Roland Casamero was as good a guitar player as I've seen anybody. I mean, he could hold his own with Eric Clapton or anybody else. His ability on a 12-string guitar, the Hokulea album he did, was just utter amazing. But when the only passion I had in Hawaii was music. Seriously, there was no other passion I had. And ironically,
used to see you at all the concerts.
Right. And the irony was, my best friends in Hawaii were DJs or promoters. John Leonard, Tom Moffat. But really, Ken Rosine, Robbie Wilson, Cantrell, that was another name. So those early guys were my friends. Mm-hmm. Leonard Lowaris was a writer for the Honolulu Advertiser, and we kind of did some stuff together. But the promoters became my friends, and then I would interface with them, and then John Leonard created Sunbumps. And I had become the
newspaper.
I became the rock photographer for Sunbump. So therefore, I had entree to every concert in Hawaii. And I basically, from 1970 to 1981, shot everything in Hawaii.
John Berger reported on
John
all of those
Berger, and there were quite a few people. So it was a really important period of my life. Mm-hmm. And I remember Irv Panitsky and Tom Moffat would call me and they'd say, Robert, can you look after this guy Alice Cooper for 10 days? Here's some dough. Look after him. Take him fishing or whatever. Or whether it be Led Zeppelin or Bobby Womack, which was another really crazy experience. Elton John, definitely. I met Elton in 70 or 71, right at the early part of his career. We're still friends.
Mm-hmm. He was just here in Japan.
Yeah, he was here last night. But it was really weird. I was getting my hair cut one day, somewhere down by Sans Souci, down there by...
Sure.
And the next chair was Stephen B. Williams.
Stephen B. Williams, a legendary DJ in Hawaii, probably had the greatest voice and articulation of any DJ.
Yeah,
right?
It was just unbelievable, his voice. The magnanimous mid-morning mouth, I think was his...
I think he went by something
like
that. Now, you knew him very well, and you knew how he ended up.
Unfortunately, he had a terrible demise.
Say what you will, but don't say too much.
Stephen was a lifelong friend, and Stephen literally was a great DJ at KKUA, and there are a few other stations in Hawaii. He went on to a station, KBBI, I think, in Denver, and then he had the #1 radio station there with Don Hawkins, who was also from Hawaii, and it was Stephen B. and the Hawk in the morning.
Stephen B. and the Hawk, a legendary show.
Legendary show, #1 show in the Denver market.
What happened to that?
Don basically drank himself to death.
Oh, and Stephen
then faced the reality of the culture of radio was like they didn't want that deep booming voice anymore. That actually became a millstone around his neck.
So he went from Denver to where?
San Francisco.
Okay.
And he basically started doing voiceovers or where he could ever get work. He was on the radio there for a little while. He was struggling. He came down to Los Angeles. I helped him find a place there. He basically was in the voiceover business.
I heard at one point he lived in a car.
He literally reached a point where he was living in a car because the very thing that made Stephen B was the very thing that was destroying him, which was the deep booming voice. Because radio was like, oh, we don't want that anymore. We want something else. I don't know what it was, but they didn't want the personality. They didn't want to have to pay for a guy to be a personality. They just wanted someone to play the music.
Yeah.
Well, I know I'm going to change my voice from
There
now
you
on.
go.
I'm just going to be doing something a little bit different here.
Right.
No.
But-
But he was a victim of his own voice.
He was a victim of his own voice. But we became very good friends in Los Angeles. I was living there. I helped him where I could. But then suddenly, Stephen B's father...
He came into a lot of money.
His father died and pretty much left him a house in Newport Beach, which alone was worth $2 million. And
We're in a restaurant, folks,
Yes,
and we're
yes.
sitting near the door, and so
That's okay.
as people come in the restaurant, they're being greeted here.
But
I'm sorry.
the house alone was probably worth $2 million, and then he found stocks and bonds, and it turned out Stephen B's father had worked for the CIA. He was a U-2 pilot, part of the Gary Powers thing, and there's this new movie out now,
Wow.
Bridge of Spies, and Stephen B's dad was a very heroic character. So Stephen inherited this huge sum of money, and suddenly, through somebody he knew in Hawaii, funny enough, was introduced to somebody that was going to help him invest his money. And Stephen gullibly believed this person.
Oh, no.
He invested the money, but then one day Stephen ran out of money and confronted the guy and ended up dead, basically.
What are you saying here? He ended up dead?
He was shot in the head.
He was shot in the head?
Yeah.
How do you know this?
Well, originally Stephen B went missing for several weeks and we didn't know how to find him, and at the same time I was doing a documentary on CIA remote viewers, psychic spies.
Okay.
And I posed the question to the CIA psychics in a blind. In other words, they had no specific information. All they had was a number, and the number correlated to a question written on a piece of paper in a sealed envelope, which was the current location of Stephen B. Williams. And
The envelope was sealed.
sealed.
They didn't-
And I had the envelope. And
They didn't look inside. They
No,
didn't have a
I
chance
held
to
the
look
envelope,
inside.
and all I did is give them a number, which was an arbitrary 6-digit number on the outside of the envelope. So I called the remote viewing psychics, and they sent it around the world to 6 other psychics, and they coordinated their psychic targeting. And 3 hours later, called me and said, Stephen B. Williams is floating 6 miles off Catalina Island. He'd been shot in the head by a business associate off the back of a yacht,
My
which just
God.
stunned me.
And so what did you do after that?
Well, funny enough, my wife and I were in Los Angeles, and we were watching the 11 o'clock news, and I was dozing off, and at 11:30, right before the news signed off, they had a sort of news bulletin that the LA Sheriff's Department had found a body floating in the Catalina Channel, but it had been out so long they couldn't identify whether it was male or female or anything.
How did they identify it as Stephen B. Williams?
Well, the next morning, I knew that had to be Stephen because of the information I got from the remote viewers. So I called the coroner's office, and I said, you know the body you found? And she said, yes. And I said, I know how to identify it. She said, how do you know? I said, well, Stephen was a friend of mine, and his left hand, his top digits of 3 of his fingers were cut off in a shop class accident in the 9th grade. So she went away for about 10 minutes. She came back, and she said, can I have your name, please, and your phone number?
Uh-oh.
And I said, here it is. I said, was that my friend? And she said, I can't tell you that, but someone wants to call you. So then she hung up, and then I got a call from the LA Sheriff's Department that wanted additional information, and how did I know this information? At which point I knew I had a problem, because how could I know this information without being the murderer?
Right. But did you tell the sheriffs that you received this information from a psychic?
I couldn't tell them directly, but I happened to know some CIA friends of mine, and I had been at a meeting with the head sheriff, Sheriff Sid Heal from the LA Sheriff's Department, and who had been briefed on the CIA on the use of psychic spies. So I instructed the officer, I gave him my name, my social security number, my home address, the license plate number of my car, and I said, I'm going to call your boss. And they said, you know our boss? I said, Sid Heal. And I said, he is going to call you within the hour. I then called my CIA friend. And I said, I have a problem. I'm going to be arrested for murder. We need to track Sid Heal down. Well, Sid happened to be in like Iraq or somewhere, advising the U.S. Marine Corps on something, and they got a hold of him, and he called his sheriffs, the sergeants, the two sergeants, and said, Robert is not a suspect. Listen to Robert. I'll explain to you later what this phenomenology is.
Okay, now how did they find, or did they find, the murderer of Stephen B. Williams?
Because I knew Stephen and I knew this person was in Stephen's life, I was able to actually supply a name then. I put two and two together rather quickly. I gave them the entire who to look for. He had disappeared. I told them where he hid where he had the money hidden. All sorts of very precise things. Inevitably, they caught up.
Stephen had the money hidden, or
no? This man had invested it offshore.
I see.
Because he had told Stephen that he needed to invest it to avoid taxes, but actually he didn't, because this was an inherited money that he didn't have to pay tax on.
Okay.
So Stephen had been sort of taken advantage of, but when Stephen demanded his money back, then that was where the issue ensued. But
they arrested the guy.
Oh, he's in prison for the rest of his life.
Do you know his name, or can you say his name?
Harvey Morrow.
Harvey what?
Morrow.
How do you spell his last name?
Morrow.
And he's charged with what?
Capital One murder.
And did you have a chance to go to the trial?
I did.
And how did the trial play out?
It was an outrageous trial. The thing about murderers in general is they tend to be amoral. They have no moral thing. So no matter what you say to them, no matter how much guilt you throw on them, they have no reaction. They're impervious to anything.
So he pleaded innocent?
He pleaded innocent. You always plead innocent in the hopes that there's a technicality.
And what kind of proof was offered to convict him?
Funny enough, what would you call that? Circumstantial evidence. Mm-hmm. But it was they never found the murder weapon. But using the remote viewers again, one of his defenses was that Stephen B. committed suicide, and that Stephen owned a gun. And again, using psychic spies, I was able to find the gun.
Oh, you did find the gun?
It had never been fired.
Okay, you found his gun, Stephen B.'s gun. But
Yes.
Didn't you say he was shot in the back of the head?
Yes.
So it would be almost impossible for him to commit suicide.
No kidding.
Yeah. So the guy is in jail.
Yes.
The murderer is in jail for the rest of his life.
Yes.
No chance for parole.
No.
Okay. What about the money?
Gone.
End of story?
Well, he had a yacht that he and Stephen were going to sail around the world, and Stephen was going to be the chef on this yacht. And the police confiscated the yacht. And Stephen B. had a sister. And she was fighting to try to get the money from the sale of the yacht. The murderer had a wife. She was saying, well, that was hers. And Stephen B.'s sister died before there was a settlement. And in the end, Stephen B.'s estate won the yacht. And there was about $200,000 that was generated off of that, but no one to give the money to. So I'm not really sure where the money went to, but at least it didn't go to the murderer or his family.
What about Stephen B. himself? Where is he buried? Or what has become of Stephen B. Williams, the great voice of radio in Hawaii throughout the late 70s, early 80s?
I think his ashes were spread at sea.
I see.
But actually, it's a story that I can't really tell because I'll get into trouble. But let's just say a couple of his friends confiscated his ashes.
You always have some little thing where you're afraid you're going to get in trouble if you reveal too much.
Let's just say it's sort of the Graham Parsons story.
Okay.
Because Stephen B. actually was related to a winemaker in the Napa Valley. Actually, family.
Okay.
And he was offered a really large position at that winery to be the host. And Stephen used to give me some wine from this particular vineyard, which was a really good Cabernet. It had a really cool name. And I think two friends of Stephen B. somehow substituted the ashes of Stephen B. And those ashes are now growing some amazing grapes in the Napa Valley.
And so let's have a toast to
Yes.
Stephen B. Williams.
Yes.
One of the greatest voices ever to hit the airwaves of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Robert Knight, thank you very much for spending some time with
Thank
us
you.
and sharing this amazing story.
There's actually a link for anybody that's really interested. If you Google the following: Las Vegas Review Journal, Seeing Dead People, Remote Viewers, you will get the entire story.
One more question before we let you go. How did the remote viewers find the murder weapon? Or did they?
Well, because again, I tasked them with the current location of Stephen B.'s 357 Magnum.
Right.
And they were able to tell me where that was.
Okay, they
And these
found
are
that.
people that have no input. They don't know even what the question is. There's no tainting of the question to them. There's no possible way they could know. And I just did a documentary. I literally shot a feature-length doctor film, which I just sold, by the way.
How can we find it?
It's coming soon, and I don't know how, when, and where, but there is a documentary on this skill. The CIA has been working for over 25 years with psychics, and very successfully. And this is an incredible. If you Google the name Ingo Swann, Ingoswann, he's the father of modern remote viewing. And he developed a way to teach people to be psychic who weren't psychic. And
As if anybody can do it?
as anybody could do it. And basically the CIA and the DIA and a bunch of other people were very interested in taking people that had high security clearances and training them to be psychic spies against our enemies. And it was very, very successful, and still very successful, but it's now in the black world.
So again, you're saying that anybody has the ability
Yes.
to be psychic?
Yes.
With proper training?
Yes, correct.
Where can a person get proper training? You said in the black world.
Well, it's in the black world.
What does
where
that
they're
mean
actually,
in the black world?
It's classified. In other words, it's in the classified world. But I could give you some names. Angela Smith, who was in fact the remote viewer that found the Stephen B. murder. Paul Smith. If you remote view Paul Smith, remote viewer, you will get to their websites and you can be trained in this skill. And funny enough, this skill resides in the area of the brain where you would learn language. So the same area of the brain where you would learn French or Japanese or Chinese is the same area where you can be taught to use the psychic receptors that we all are born with. But for whatever reason, we're born with these receptors in the off position, probably because we can't handle that ability. I don't think we're ready as a species to be able to be psychic, to read people's thoughts, to handle that, because we always make rash decisions in our head, like someone cuts you off in a car and you go, I want to kill that person.
Road
so,
rage.
So those are temporary things, and if you were able to read someone's mind and then you knew that some person wanted to kill you, you might react too quickly when actually it's not really
Especially
a
as
threat.
the world is arming up
Yeah.
these days, right?
So, but remote viewing is such that you could actually remote view the head of ISIS and determine what his end gate is, what his purpose is, what he's trying to achieve, where his weaknesses are. So I can tell you there are people doing this right now as we speak in places around the planet. Actually, on both sides.
I would like to hear more about that, but we're running very
Okay.
short on time.
All right, I know it all sounds far-fetched, but it's out there.
No, I mean, it does sound far-fetched, of course, but
Right, yeah.
we do hear that there are instances, there are situations where these kinds of things
Yeah.
are happening.
Yeah, we all have this ability, believe it or not.
I want to find out where my on switch is.
You have a few of them, but this is part of the world of quantum physics and quantum entanglement, and this is the new Michio Kaku, at least 11 parallel universes.
That's what he says, and they're all
Mainstream.
wrapped up real tiny little
real
dots.
close.
Robert Knight, again,
Thank you.
thank you very much, and
Right.
thank you for
Aloha.
bringing us up to date on
Okay.
Stephen B. Williams.
Okay.